This episode of Warbird Tube is brought to you in part by Aviation Discovery Fest. Celebrate the spirit of freedom as Aviation Discovery Fest returns to Dallas October 4th through the 6th. Experience world-changing vintage aircraft and military vehicles. See living history with authentic reenactors and pay honor to the veterans of the greatest generation. Plus, you can take flight with Living History Flight Experiences. Be sure and get your tickets today at aviationdiscoveryfest.org.
Hey everybody, welcome to CAF Warbird Tube, the show where we talk about World War II, aviation, history, and so much more. Warbird Tube is produced by the Commemorative Air Force, the world's largest flying museum. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and honor through flight and living history experiences. The CAF began the Warbird movement more than 65 years ago, and thanks to the support of individuals like you, we continue to grow strong. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and now our host, Steve Buss. Thanks for watching and keep 'em flying.
Good evening, airplane fans, and welcome to CAF Warbird Tube. Tonight, episode number 170, and we're going to talk about the famous de Havilland Mosquito and a role it played in the U.S. forces that most people don't know about. We'll find out more with our guest, Ross Sharp, in just a few moments. Now, whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a loyal Warbird Tube fan, we're thrilled to have you with us tonight. If you enjoy our content, please share it on your favorite social media platforms. We do appreciate it. Now, Warbird Tube is made possible by the Commemorative Air Force. If you'd like to find out more about CAF, our events, our aircraft, local units, or how you can be a part of the fun, just visit our website, commemorativeairforce.org. Now, as you're watching tonight, you might have some questions. Just type those in the chat box and we'll try to answer them either during the presentation or for sure before we sign off. So joining us now is Ross Sharp. Ross, great to have you back and talking about something that's near and dear to your heart, and that is the de Havilland Mosquito.
Absolutely. Great to be with you, Steve. As always, CAF does lovely things. The Mosquito is a fabulous aircraft, and since I'm, for my sins, the chief engineering officer of the People's Mosquito, we're actually building one of these fine birds. It's my delight to tell you all about it. There you can see an unknown officer in his pink and green standing proudly by his de Havilland Mosquito. It's a wonderful machine, but how it got to be flown by the United States Army Air Forces is a whole different story, and we're going to start that now. The prototype DH-98 Mosquito E0234, or to give it its Royal Air Force serial, Whiskey 4050, here you can see it being rolled out of the hangar prior to its first flight, and pre-flight adjustments are being made. This is November 1941. The prototype was financed by the de Havilland Company itself, with little official interest at this stage. Absolutely nobody wanted an unarmed bomber. It's painted all over yellow to warn anti-aircraft defences in the south of England. It was then covered in sacking in case a Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft came by. After all, it was only 20 miles due north of the centre of London. Later, trainers and prototypes would have full camouflage paint schemes on their upper surfaces with yellow undersides only to give them some protection whilst on the ground. Note the short engine nacelles. Due to aerodynamic buffeting, these would be later extended beyond the trailing edge of the wing. This meant that the Mosquito had, or rather developed, split flaps on its trailing edge. General H.H. Arnold and Major Elwood Pete Quesada see the Mosquito. The prototype Mosquito is shown here on the day of its first flight, the 25th of November 1940, carrying only the manufacturer's registration E0234 at this stage. The prototype and the rest of the Mosquitoes entered Royal Air Force service on the 15th of November 1941. On the 21st of April 1941, Ambassador John Winant and General Arnold and then Major Pete Quesada, who of course was later to command the 9th Tactical Air Force in Normandy, visited Hatfield, the home airfield of de Havilland, ostensibly to view United States aircraft types already supplied to the Royal Air Force. The Mosquito prototype, however, flown by Jeffrey de Havilland Jr., the chief de Havilland test pilot, gave an amazing 400-mile-an-hour plus display, with upward rolls with one engine feathered and crackling wingtip vortices caused by Jeffrey de Havilland Jr. standing it on its wingtips and hurtling it round inside the perimeter of the airfield. Much impressed, General Arnold took specifications of the Mosquito and drawings back to Washington, D.C., but projected US production plans failed. At that time, President Roosevelt had initiated his 50,000 planes a year plan, and all the major manufacturers were chock full of orders both from the US and from Britain. So a consortium of smaller manufacturers got together, led by Beech. They also included Fleet Wings and some other manufacturers, Curtiss-Wright, Fairchild and Hughes. But after a few weeks, they sent back a message to General Arnold from a Beech spokesman. I'm just going to read you this quote. "It appears as though this airplane has sacrificed serviceability, structural strength, ease of construction, and flying characteristics in an attempt to use construction material which is not suitable for the manufacture of efficient aircraft." I hope the gentleman who made that statement stayed inside due to an overtaking of embarrassment, shall we say. Here we see Jeffrey de Havilland Jr., chief test pilot of the de Havilland Aircraft Company, standing in front of a Mosquito. He was a superb test pilot. He went to Canada to undertake many of the early flights of the first de Havilland Canada-built Mosquito, a B Mark 7 registration Kilo Bravo 300. He performed public demonstrations of the Mosquito over Toronto and over Wright Field and Washington, D.C. after General Arnold obtained permission for him to do so. Unfortunately, he met his death in September 1946 in the crash of an experimental de Havilland 108 jet aircraft whilst preparing for an attempt on the world airspeed record. The Mosquito F-8DH was the official designation given by the United States authorities to the Mosquito in their service. And here you see one of those being rolled out of de Havilland, Canada from their Downsview, Ontario facility. A total of 41 Mosquitoes were taken on charge by the United States Army Air Force from Canadian production lines. 7 B Mark 7s, which was the initial standard, and 34 B Mark 20s, which was the later version with higher rated Packard Merlins. They were all fitted with Packard Merlin engines and a mix of United States and Canadian instrumentation and equipment. Here the B Mark 9, Mark 20 is slowly being pushed out of the Downsview facility. As you can see, there are lots of snow and ice about. All DHC Mosquitoes for the USAF passed through the Bell Modification Center in Buffalo, New York, prior to being taken on charge. The United States Army Air Force were to receive more than 130 Mosquitoes, mostly British made, including at least 4 T Mark III dual control trainers. Here we see a very nice photograph of Joan Fontaine. You might say, what has she got to do with the Mosquito? Well, she was present at the public rollout of the first de Havilland Canada-produced B Mark 7 Mosquito. Miss Fontaine's birth name, she was born in Tokyo whilst her parents were living there, was Joan de Beauvoir de Havilland. She changed it so as to avoid confusion with her sister, the actress Olivia de Havilland. As an aside, they are the only two sisters to both win an Oscar for leading lady. The sisters were cousins of Sir Geoffrey de Havilland, founder of the company, and Joan supported the efforts of mosquito production immensely. Here you see a photograph of an F8 at Langley Field. It was there to undergo stability tests. You can see, believe it or not, a B-17 in the background. Now, this is a B Mark 20, and it was produced in Canada, obviously. It was powered by 1,400 horsepower Packard Merlin 33s. They were the equivalent of the British Merlin 23. Now, you might say, wait a minute, Merlins are V12 engines. I can only count 5 exhaust stubs on that Mosquito. What's going on? Well, the inboard exhaust stubs are immediately ahead of an aluminium tray on the leading edge of the wing, which contained the cabin heat exchanger, the radiator for the Merlin, and the oil cooler. And they were too close and led to overheating problems. The easy solution for this was to Siamese number 5 and number 6 exhaust ports together, giving a common exhaust. That dragged the whole stream of hot gases forward just enough to avoid problems. You're now going to say, well, why are there 5 exhaust ports on the outboard section of the wing when there are no radiators to worry about? There's one mechanical reason for this. If you had a Siamese port on the outer set of exhaust stubs and 6 exhaust ports on the inner set of exhaust stubs, it would lead to an uneven exhaust beat, and you could actually start damaging the crankshaft bearings mechanically because of that. At least that's the explanation I worked out. So this wonderful machine, as you can see, is the classic Mosquito style, and it appears to be slightly puzzling to the ground crew standing away to the left. The next shot you can see is an F8 in a rare situation. One of the few F8s to see combat in North Africa and Italy. It's called the Spook. This F8/DH was ferried across the Atlantic by Major James Setchell, the pilot, and Captain Jerome Alexander, his navigator. The aircraft was built as a B Mark 7, Kilo Bravo 315, or US registration 43-34926. Based at La Marsa in Tunisia with the 5th Photographic Group, then was sent to San Severo, Italy. Major Setchell earned a DFC for bringing back valuable information whilst facing heavy flak during 2 missions. The F4 Lightning was preferred by United States Higher Command in the MTO to the F8, due, it is said, to the Merlin's low altitude rated Merlins. The Spook, by the way, painted on the nose, refers to the nickname of Major Setchell's young son. Here we see Lieutenant Colonel Elliot Roosevelt, the 3rd child of the president. He's receiving the DFC in Algiers in 1943. He was a great admirer of the de Havilland Mosquito. I believe he first flew one that he commandeered from an airfield in Gibraltar. He commanded various reconnaissance units in North Africa, and he made urgent requests to the US authorities to be passed on to the UK authorities for more of the type. In 1943, Elliott Roosevelt was in command of the North African Reconnaissance Wing, which included No. 60 Squadron, South African Air Force, which was equipped at that stage with a mix of Mosquito Fighter Bomber 6 and PR Mark 9 aircraft, and they were tasked to undertake reconnaissance throughout the MTO. Here we see the Mosquito PR Mark 16, Mike 345 at Royal Air Force Mount Farm, United States Army Air Force Station 234, easy to remember that one. Seen here with an F-4 Lightning, the United States Army Air Force standardized on the PR-16 version of the Mosquito. Mike 345 was built at Hatfield, the main de Havilland works, and fitted with Merlin 72 or 73 engines. Finished all over PR blue, Mike 345 has the red tail applied after United States Army Air Force Mosquitoes tragically suffered a number of blue-on-blue losses in action over Europe. By this stage of the war, many United States Army Air Force Mosquitoes had reduced the D-Day markings to just those under the rear fuselage, as seen here. This aircraft survived the war, only to be scrapped on the 25th of July, 1946. Nose art. This 1944 built PR-16 was part of the 25th Bomb Group, consisting of the 653rd Bomber Squadron, Light Weather Reconnaissance, and the 654th Bomber Squadron, Heavy Reconnaissance Special. Both units had a mix of other aircraft. The 653rd had some B-17 and B-24, and the 654th had B-25, B-26 and P-38. This reflected their respective missions. The 802nd Reconnaissance Group was the precursor unit to the 25th Bomber Group and also had Mosquitoes. The 25th was based at Royal Air Force Watton in Norfolk, England, which is in East Anglia. The aircraft's nose art features a diving figure and the name Pamelia, spelled P-A-M-E-L-I-A for some reason.
We've got a question from one of our viewers.
By all means.
Why were the U.S. Army Air Force Mosquitoes painted blue while most other aircraft in the livery were olive drab or camouflage?
It was found that blue, this particular shade, photo reconnaissance blue, reduced visibility at altitude. So that meant that if you had optically guided Flak 88 or Flak 120 in Germany or other axis controlled areas, it made tracking more difficult. This had been researched by the Royal Air Force, and every single Mosquito that was designated as a PR type, be it built at the main works at Hatfield or the secondary works 12 miles away at Leavesden, was finished in this standard PR colour. The United States Air Force altered things when necessary. For example, the red tail for identification purposes, since losses had fallen to US fighters over Germany. But they kept the standard PR blue as it was very, very useful in its role. You'll see another colour being used, but that's for later. There was one Mosquito ace. First Lieutenant James Forrest Lou Loomer, DFC and DFC British, a most unusual twin award there. Lou Loomer joined the Royal Canadian Air Force prior to Pearl Harbor, like many of his contemporaries, just by heading north. He wanted to get in the fight. He trained in Canada under the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan before being posted to number 418 Royal Canadian Air Force Squadron in the UK, who were flying the Mosquito NF-2 night fighter. This was to gain experience because the USAF at that time had no active night fighter squadrons. Lou became the only US ace on the Mosquito. In this particular painting, which is a beautifully dramatic one, Lou is seen here making his first kill over southern France on the night of the 21st, 22nd of January 1944, flying a Mosquito NF2 from 418 RCAF Squadron. Hotel Juliet 715 was the serial number, and it was coded Tango Hotel Delta and named Moonbeam McSwine from the Little Abner comic strip, and you can see the nose art there in the photograph of the painting. First Lieutenant Loomer claimed an ME-410 destroyed. This dramatic painting is by the artist Roy Grinnell and is entitled First Sting, quite appropriately. Lou survived the war and became an airline pilot, by the way. Admiral Harold F. Stark, United States Navy. You might be wondering what he had to do with the Mosquito. Well, he's seen here with General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander, Allied Expeditionary Force, and Admiral Stark was Commander U.S. Naval Forces Europe. He held a secret meeting with 10 U.S. naval flyers at the U.S. Embassy in Grosvenor Square, London, on the 1st of July 1944, shortly after D-Day. These officers were to be sent to the premier Royal Air Force Mosquito Night Fighter and Intruder Training Unit, number 51 OTU, that's Operational Training Unit, and then seconded to various RAF Mosquito Night Fighter squadrons to gain experience before being posted to the Pacific, where they would form the core of an expanded United States Navy night fighter force. Several went to number 615 Squadron, Royal Air Force, which, by the way, was half Czech manned, and it was then fighting the V-1 missile barrage against London using American-built SCR-720 radar-equipped Mosquitoes. Amazing statistic, this. Sadly, only 4 members of this group of 10 officers were to survive the war. A very special Mosquito, the Mickey ship. Small number of United States Army Air Force PR-16 were converted to carry the H-2X radar, a US-developed version of the British H-2S blind bombing aid in a bulged nose, as you can see here. The third crew member was carried in the rear fuselage, which you accessed through a hatch on the starboard side to operate the radar over possible Axis targets. Pictures of the radar scope were taken with a K-22 camera. A Rolex watch was mounted alongside the H-2X scope so that images could be identified. Because of the huge increase in demand on the Mosquito's electrical system, the H-2X was more powerful than the H-2S. Sometimes fires would result when the set was switched on. Standard PR camera fit. Usually the United States Army Air Force PR-16s were fitted with a pair of split 12-inch vertical cameras in the rear fuselage, although a single K-17 or K-22 camera could be carried in the forward fuselage. On night photo reconnaissance missions, which were codenamed Joker, quantities of the 100-pound AN M46 photo flash bombs were carried in the bomb bay. These could produce an intense flash of up to 500 million candle power, and this allowed high altitude night photography, and I'm talking 30,000 feet plus. The most dangerous missions. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe day fighter force over Western Europe had been severely degraded by the actions of the Allied air forces. Fighter opposition to the immense bomber streams of B-17s and B-24s had lessened, although there were sometimes slashing attacks by Me-262 jet fighters. However, German radar-directed flak was still very accurate. After all, they'd had an awful lot of practice by this stage. So special Grey Pea missions were flown by USAF Mosquitoes, positioned immediately ahead of each B-17 division. These Mosquitoes, usually flying 3 abreast, dispensed chaff, window in British terms, as they approached the target area. As you can imagine, casualty rates amongst these Mosquitoes were heightened, both by the flak, which they were not protected against, and the predatory ME-262s. Survivability. The Mosquito needed careful handling on takeoff. It was easy to induce a ground loop. The best tactic was to get the rudder and elevators into the slipstream as soon as possible and to correct any incipient swings immediately. Sadly, it was not helped by the fact that the Merlin engines were not handed, as those Allison engines on the P-38 were. November Sierra 651, serial K, Woodpecker's Delight, which I think is a lovely name for a mosquito, of the 654th Bomber Squadron is seen at RAF Watton on the 5th of March 1945, very close to the end of hostilities in Europe, after the undercarriage collapsed during takeoff. This is typical if you've got a bad ground loop developing.
When you mentioned that the Merlin engines on the Mosquito were not handed, what does that
in the same direction?
Okay.
If you have a twin engine machine such as the 38, which has one rotating left and one rotating right, then the P factor, the torque generated by the propellers, cancel each other out.
Right.
And you can easily trim an engine out much more easily if the propeller is rotating towards the fuselage. If it's rotating away from the fuselage, then you have a severe problem. And of course, the critical engine on the Mosquito was always the port engine. And if that failed, you were in real trouble. Another crack up. PR-16 Southern Belle is seen after another mishap. Being made of wood made most structural repairs both simple and relatively fast. Indeed, if a wingtip was damaged, you could send for a pre-packaged kit, which contained a spare, fittings, and instructions as to where to make the cut to remove the damaged part and splice the new one in. Note the crumpled port rear engine nacelle. This is, of course, made of, as I would say, aluminium, or to our United States friends, aluminum alloy. The P-61 problem. The United States had no specialist night fighter aircraft when World War II broke out, though, of course, some machines such as the P-70 were converted from others. The Northrop P-61 Black Widow was designed from the outset as a night fighter intruder, but because of its advanced design, it suffered considerable production and development delays. To bridge this gap, United States Army Air Force squadrons in the MTO were issued with Bristol Beaufighters from Royal Air Force stocks. These Beaufighters had a top speed of around 320 miles per hour, but were being overtaken in performance terms by Axis bombers. One USAF unit, the 416th Night Fighter Squadron, was issued with a mix of Mosquito NF-19 and the NF-30, the current Royal Air Force night fighter that was nearly 100 miles an hour faster than the Beaufighter. Here is a 416th Squadron Mosquito, a Leavesden-built NF-30 fitted with Merlin 76 engines at Pontedera, Italy. Centrimetric radar on a United States Air Force NF-30 in Italy. This Italian-based 416th Night Fighter Squadron Mosquito carries the AI Mark 9 centimetric radar, a British-built equivalent of the American SCR 720 set in a bulbous nose. This centimetric radar was advanced for its time and continued in use post-war for many years. Brazilian Air Force P-47Ds, a Premier Grupo de Caça, can be seen in the background. After Brazil declared war on the Axis, it managed to get sufficient personnel together to staff a squadron of Thunderbolts, and they operated alongside American units. Mosquito PR-16 November Sierra 590. Note the overpainted Royal Air Force roundels on the wings of this Mosquito, which you can see as dark discs. These would have been carried during its delivery flight from the factory to Base Air Depot number 1 at Royal Air Force Burtonwood on the flat Cheshire Plain. BAD-1 handled all major aircraft servicing for aircraft of the 8th, 9th, 12th and 15th Air Forces, and was the largest airfield in Europe during World War II. At its peak, over 18,000 United States Army Air Force personnel were based there. Burtonwood is just 16 miles due east of the port city of Liverpool on the Irish Sea, so BAD-1 was ideally placed. D-Day markings are shown on the lower fuselage only of this Mosquito, and this was common by this stage of the war. This 1944 Hatfield-built aircraft was to survive the war, again being scrapped like many of its contemporaries in September 1947. United States Army Air Force ground crew loading camera. This obviously posed photograph shows a camera due to be fitted to a 25th Bomb Group PR-16. It can be seen that there are at least 24 photographic mission symbols painted on the nose of this Mossy. Please note the variations of uniforms being worn. East Anglia could be surprisingly cold in winter, and the winter of 1944-45 was exceptionally cold in Europe. Please see any film of the Battle of the Bulge. Here you see a PR-16 of the 25th Bomb Group, Royal Air Force Harrington. It's been seconded, as you will see. November Sierra 581 Q, all black finish to this Mosquito with red serial and letters, was as used on Joan-Eleanor missions by the 492nd Bombardment Group that got its Mosquitoes via the 25th. This was taken in the winter 1944-45. The Joan-Eleanor missions and the 492nd Bomb Group. Towards the end of the war in Europe, the OSS needed a secure method of contacting their agents in Europe. To achieve this, a number of Mosquitoes were assigned to the 492nd Bomb Group at Royal Air Force Harrington in Northamptonshire. The OSS agents were issued with special miniature UHF transceivers called the SSTR-6. This was designed to project a conical signal skywards and weighed about 2.5 pounds. This S-phone, so-called, was used to speak in clear language to a US OSS operator who had an SSTC 502 radio and a wire recorder carried in the rear fuselage of a Mosquito, which would be orbiting over a prearranged coordinates between 30 and 40,000 feet. Here is a Joan-Eleanor crew. Left to right, William Misco, navigator, Kindo Knapp, pilot, and the very tall gentleman on the end is William Sawyer, OSS equipment operator. I am sure that this OSS member of the crew had a hard time in the cramped rear fuselage of the Mosquito. This shot was taken at Royal Air Force Harrington. Here's another Special Ops Mosquito. This Mosquito PR-16 is finished all over black and was likely used to undertake covert missions over Europe by the 492nd Bomb Group. These missions were codenamed Red Stocking. Please note the B-26 aircraft in the background, which points up to the fact that this photograph was taken at RAF Harrington in Northamptonshire. Project Anvil mission, Lieutenant Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., United States Naval Reserve, KIA. On the 12th of August 1944, a PB-4Y-1 drone, United States Navy B-24, took off to attack the V-3 site of Mimoyec in France. Piloting the aircraft was Lieutenant Joseph P. Kennedy, USNR, with Lieutenant Wilfred Wiley as co-pilot and radio operator. The explosive-laden drone reached 2,000 feet and formatted with its Ventura control aircraft, P-51 escort, and 2 photographic Mosquitoes. Suddenly, the PB-4Y-1 disappeared in a huge explosion. Debris knocked out the port engine of November Sierra 569, and pilot First Lieutenant Robert Tunnell had to make an emergency landing. His navigator, Second Lieutenant J.M. McCarthy, was injured. Here you can see the crew standing next to their Mosquito, and you can see the large hole made in their Merlin. Winding down. VE Day brought a rapid winding down of USAAF Mosquito operations. Sadly, no Mosquitoes could be spared for possible USAF or USN missions in the Pacific or CBI theaters of operations, where their speed, range, and versatility could have made a huge difference. One can only speculate on what would have happened if a US-based Mosquito production line could have been activated. After all, the Mosquito already owed much to the large quantities of Wisconsin-produced yellow birch plywood. Here you see a very interesting photograph taken during the war. You can see on the extreme left of the line a YP-59 Aerocomet from Bell. Next to that, a Northrop P-61 Black Widow. Then a Lockheed P-38, fitted, as you can see, with an AN APS-4 radar in a pod underneath the fuselage, and an NF-30 Mosquito, which had been sent to the United States. This is a very rare machine. Not the fact it's an NF-30, it's the fact that it was originally taken on charge by number 219 for operational sorties, then sent to the Royal Air Force's Central Fighter Establishment, the CFE, where doubtless it was fitted with quite a lot of secret and experimental gear. I can tell that because if you enlarge this photograph, you will see that behind the serial there is a hash mark and then a letter in capitals G. This has a special connotation for any RAF aircraft. It means that if it wasn't locked in a hangar, was on the flight line or any other part of an airfield, it had to be under armed guard at all times. So a rare aircraft, and one obviously that looks nice, shall we say, in that lineup. A special Mosquito for the United States Navy, Mosquito FB-18. In 1944, the United States Navy requested an example of the very rare Mosquito FB-18, only 27 of which were built. Seen here with a spare 57mm autocannon, which could empty its magazine of 20 shells in just over 25 seconds. Yes, that's one shot every 1.1 seconds if you kept the trigger pressed down. The US Navy wants to compare its performance against the manually loaded AN Mark V 75mm cannon as fitted to their PBJ-1H Mitchell. Tests at Pax River found the FB-18 superior in many respects, being able to withstand 2.5 G during firing and with better accuracy. However, VJ Day ended any thought of a United States Navy Mosquito. The National Museum of the United States Air Force DH-98 Mosquito. To honor those who flew in and maintained the Mosquito in United States Army Air Force service, the National Museum of the United States Air Force acquired a post-war TT-35 target tug conversion of a B-35 Mosquito bomber from a private British supplier. By carefully deconverting the bulged bomb bay doors and making other changes, an externally accurate version of a USAF PR-16 was produced. This was finished as a late-war red-tail Mosquito from the 25th Bomber Group. There are, of course, a number of modern restored Mosquitoes in the US and Canada, whilst the People's Mosquito, the organization I'm involved with, is now building the first DH-98 in the Mosquito in the UK for 73 years. I couldn't resist this, ladies and gentlemen. This is your compulsory advert. It won't last long. As you can see, a piece of artwork we constructed for the Royal International Air Tattoo, which shows a Mosquito in flight, the Union flag. By the way, it should never be referred to as a Union Jack unless it's being flown from the jack staff of a Royal Navy warship. Trivia. The Union flag and our logo. And I would encourage you to go to www.peoplesmosquito.org.uk for more details. We are always looking for sponsorship, both in kind or in greenbacks. By the way, membership of our club only costs about $35 a year, which is a bargain when you consider what you also get a color magazine with that. So, questions? Happy to take them.
All right. Well, we've got a couple here. Nick is wondering on some of the photos that we're seeing, there are 6 exhaust ports, and then you talked earlier about there only being 5. So, yeah, okay. What was the difference?
Well, I mentioned about the overheating problem, and Nicky, it's quite simple. The final exhaust ports, as I said, the one that shows the conjoined ones with the 5 exhausts, they're on the single stage early Merlin engines. Now, the mid-war saw the rise of the 2-stage Merlin as fitted to aircraft such as the P-51, and that 2-stage Merlin is 7 inches longer than the single-stage Merlin. And those 7 inches are just long enough to move the engine forward to avoid the heating problem, so you can then get rid of the conjoined exhaust ports and have the straight 6 exhausts either side. So that's how you can tell a Mosquito that's fitted with a single-stage Merlin or one that's got a 2-stage Merlin.
Very good. Richard is wondering what oblique cameras were mounted on the Mosquito.
Obliques, they ranged. I'm uncertain of the American fit. We had 34s, and they could vary in focal length between 12 inches and 24 inches, usually fitted in stereo-optic pairs, slightly angled away from each other, so you've got overlap. And you'll see underneath every Mosquito 2, the photographic one certainly, and also the bombers, 2 translucent circular windows in the belly of the beast, and that lines up with the slightly canted twin photographic setup in the rear fuselage. The K-22 and the K-17 could also be fitted singly in in the nose, and that's what was done with many bomber conversions.
Very good. Did the U.S. return the Mosquitoes after the war?
Sadly, no. I think that most of them were supplied under what was called reverse lend-lease. After all, lend-lease worked both ways. Mm-hmm. Amazingly, as well as such things as supplying early P-51As, we would call the Mustang 1, and indeed later P-51s, which we call the Mustang 3, under Lend-Lease, and lots of other aircraft, such as B-17s, which we used by 100 Group for covert operations over Germany. We also supplied some things to the United States in theatre. Mosquitoes were one, and we also supplied, believe it or not, de Havilland Dragon Rapide biplanes to be used as taxis between United States Air Force stations. So it was a two-way street. But the terms of Lend-Lease were this: if you handed it back to the loanee nation, which would be the United Kingdom in this case, you didn't have to pay for it. But if you retained it, you actually had to pony up dollars or pounds in this case. This led to, after the VJ Day, when the Royal Navy was recovering its carriers back from Task Force 58 in the Pacific, when they got to the Indian Ocean, they fired off every single Avenger, Corsair, Wildcat into the deep. Because had they landed on UK port with these on board, the UK would have had to have paid hard currency, which we didn't have. We were actually broke by that stage. One aside, by the way, we actually finished paying for the loan that we took out from the United States at the end of the war because we were broken. You'll be amazed to find out when the final payment was made. New Year's Day 2000.
Oh my.
Yeah, we were so broke that even bread was rationed after the war. And even I had a little ration card, which I still have.
Well, and this doesn't have anything to do with what we've been talking about tonight, but that is kind of a little known or little publicized, at least in the States, is that after the war was over, here in the U.S., everybody came home, prosperity, people were buying houses, building houses, everything was, the baby boom was underway. But in the United Kingdom, it was a completely different atmosphere.
Well, yes, you have to understand that 63,000 of our civilian population were killed by enemy action.
Yeah.
I'm not talking soldiers here. Right. I'm talking civilians. The whole centers of cities were flattened and burned out. Primary industries were devastated. And we had expended every single ounce of gold that we had. As a matter of fact, our gold was sent in a warship and ended up in Fort Knox. Because before Lend-Lease happened, we paid everything cash on the nailhead. So yeah, it's difficult to explain to people. Priorities were obviously to the Marshall Plan to get Europe rebuilt, but the UK was virtually on its own.
Yeah. And
we had major problems, which, up until 1989, 1990, I could take you to the center of the big city of Sheffield, which is about 20 miles away from where I'm sitting. And by going down a certain street, I could still show you empty lots with bomb damage.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So back to the Mosquito. See, Howard was saying his comment, we're so lucky to have several Mosquito aircraft flying in the US, the UK, and New Zealand. Are they flying anywhere else?
No. We have Mosquitoes in museums elsewhere. The Australian War Memorial in Canberra, which has a fabulous museum section, has the only photo reconnaissance Mark 41 in existence, hanging from its ceiling. In South Africa, there is the only first generation photo reconnaissance machine, a PR Mark 9, which was flown back from North Africa to South Africa by number 60 Squadron and retired, and it's now on display. There's a museum, the National Museum in Canada actually has a B Mark 20 on display. We have loaned, that's the Royal Air Force, taking on his Royal Air Force persona. For my sins, I was Deputy Airshow Coordinator, Royal Air Force at RAF Finningley and RAF Waddington. The RAF Museum loaned a Mosquito T3 trainer to the Norwegians, which is now in their museum in Bodo, and it's painted as a 333 Squadron FB6, looks very nice. 333 Squadron, the Norwegian squadron that operated Mosquitoes, were very unusual in that they had an A flight and a B flight. B flight flew Mosquitoes, A flight flew Catalinas, and they were the reconnaissance guys that went up and down the Norwegian fjords covertly looking for targets for the Mosses to hit.
Richard jumped onto your comment about the post-war life in the UK. He said the wedding of Liz and Phil in 1947 was one of the first upticks from post-war rationing.
Yes, it was, and there were releases of goods to make that. I remember seeing an excellent historical film, a short film on YouTube of a junior minister for trade called Harold Wilson in the Attlee post-war government. And I nearly fell off my chair because Harold Wilson became prime minister many years later. And he was saying that he was being able to release a certain quantity of shirt-making material. However, he was unable to release any poplin material, as that was one of our best earners for export and hard currency. Things were incredibly bad after the war. And that's why there was this almost complete upheaval in the 1945 general election. Winston Churchill, who had been a great war leader, was ousted, and there was a massive swing to the left with the Labour government. I think that Britain might have spoilt its relations with the cousins across the Atlantic because the Labour government was extremely left-wing. For example, they actually, when requested by the Russians as to whether the Russians could buy 2 of the new Rolls-Royce Derwent jet engines for research purposes, they happily agreed and shipped 2 over. Next thing you know, about 5 years later, when the Korean War breaks out, the MiG-15s are being powered by a copy, the Klimov K1 engine, which, if you take it apart, looks just like a Rolls-Royce Derwent. So yes, there were big political upheavals, in some cases very necessary, bringing in of the National Health Service. We still have, just about hanging on by its teeth, free medicine for all, apart from a small charge for certain prescriptions. Since I'm a pensioner, I don't have to pay a cent.
There you go. You had mentioned starting up a sort of a group in the United States to support the people's mosquito. Any thoughts to doing that in Canada, considering
well,
so
this
many
is actually
mosquitoes have been
for both the United States and Canada. It's going to involve the whole of North America. I don't want to let too many cats out of the bag, but the name will involve both of them.
Okay.
We have to make it a 5013C corporation for tax purposes. It's very difficult because the two concepts of charitable giving in the UK and the US do not handshake in legal terms.
Right.
That's why we have American lawyers working on this at the moment. There will be a mixed UK and US board. For my sins, I know that I'm going to be on it, mainly because I'm an American citizen, despite the accent. It's going to be the best analog I can come up with. If people look at the Royal Oak Society in the United States that supports the work of the National Trust for England and Wales, supporting National Trust properties, open spaces, national parks and the like, then that's what the analog is going to be. But of course, once you get legal beagles on both sides of the Atlantic involved, it'll take a few months, shall we say, maybe a little less, to actually get it up and running. But when it does, you guys can look for an explosion of data and photographs and special bits and pieces just for the US and Canada.
Very good. We'll look forward to that. Any final thoughts before we wrap up tonight?
No, other than the fact that I've just been asked to be the guest speaker at the annual lunch of the de Havilland Technical School Association. All the alums gather together, and there are going to be people there on the engineering side from as far back as 1947. So it's going to be de Havilland personnel and Hawker Siddeley personnel, and that's taking place at the de Havilland Museum in September. So I feel honoured, particularly since I worked for neither DH nor the Hawker Siddeley group, to be invited to do that. And I'll keep you guys well and truly informed about my doings. Oh, and by the way, I am looking forward to a certain air show that's taking place in October that you might know something about.
Indeed. Yes.
So if you're in Virginia Beach, you can come and buttonhole me when I'm sort of staggering around under a huge camera lens, perhaps.
Very good. Ross, thank you so very much for joining us again tonight. And, for those who don't realize it, it's, 2 o'clock in the morning there?
It's about 1:57 at the moment, AM. But after 23 years of living in America and various time zones in America, I can only say that at least half of my body is still on US time.
Well, very good. Well, we appreciate it. And again, as always, thank you for sharing your intimate knowledge of the mosquito and the role it played in the U.S. Army Air Force. Now, we'd like to hear, we'd like to hear your thoughts on tonight's episode or any ideas you have for future topics. Feel free to drop us a line at media@cafhq.org. If you like the show tonight, please share it across your social media platforms. Remember to subscribe and click that bell icon on YouTube, and you'll get notifications when our new episodes are posted. Until next time, I'm Steve Buss, wishing you blue skies and tailwinds. Have a great night.